Let's talk about empathy in Trump's America. At times, it seems we've collectively become immune to the pain and suffering of people in this country. Then I noticed the hours pundits and TV news continues to devote to the downtrodden Trump voter. The countless columns, albeit by white men, demanding Trump voters not be vilified because they're suffering too. It wasn't racism that motivated them, but profound disgust with society that's left them behind. Last week, the LA Times featured the story of Kathy Watson from Florida. In the story, she said, and I quote, "Walk a mile in my shoes. I never thought I'd have to go through all of this. I was working for an attorney. I was making good money. I'm not here to get something for nothing. I just want to be healthy, pay my bills, and go about my life." End quote. The article didn't go into why she supported Trump, other than the vague, he was going to bring change to D.C. Here's another Trump voter worried about losing his health insurance.
I did what I thought was correct for the overall good of the country. I think economic strength cures a lot of things. People working, making decent money, that certainly helps out. I'd rather not need the subsidies. I'd rather be working.
We are repealing and replacing Obamacare.
The mile Kathy wants us to walk in her shoes to understand her circumstances, I'm willing to bet she's not willing to walk for others. Let's say the supposed Mexican rapists that have invaded our country. Does she have empathy for them? In reality, we're reading stories every day not of dangerous criminals being deported, but a woman with brain cancer who was dragged out of her hospital bed with blood still gushing from her nose. A father dropping off his child at school. A woman getting a restraining order against an abusive husband. Go ahead, tell me why I need to feel empathy for these basket of deplorables. So Nick Kristof of the New York Times jumped in to educate me. In his hometown of Yamhill, Oregon, quote, "The glove factory closed down, the timber business slimmed, union jobs disappeared, good folks found themselves struggling and sometimes self-medicated with methamphetamines or heroin. Too many of my schoolmates died early. One, Stacy Laslett, died of hypothermia while she was homeless," end quote. Of course, he conveniently left out how many of these unionized factory workers purposely shut out black workers from getting these jobs in the first place. I will say that his lack of empathy is not confined to white people. There's the story of the Azalis, Syrian immigrants who supported Trump. This is what they have to say about their support for Trump, but also why we need to give empathy when his cruel policies impacted them.
Now, what would you say to him?
I would say, why? Where's your human side to send somebody into a war zone? I understand he wants to make America safe. We're all on with this. I definitely want to be in a safe place, but people need us, and we need to be there for them.
Tonight, it's not clear when they'll see their family again.
All of this empathy we need to have towards people who chose not blindly, but knowingly, a man that explicitly spouted his hatred for communities of color. Anna Marie Cox, MTV News' senior political correspondent, recently launched a podcast called With Friends Like These. She talked to a pastor in Wisconsin on why his community voted for Obama and then voted for Trump. Pastor Jackson confirms that many of his supporters knowingly chose Trump and made a conscious, educated decision because they thought he was the better candidate. Hatred be damned, or I would argue because of his hateful rhetoric. Sorry, Trump voters, I don't have a tear to spare for you because you're now caught in the crosshairs of this vile president's agenda that you thought he would only bring to other people. I'd also like to ask those asking me to shed tears for them and extend my empathy where their empathy has been for the last 50, 20, 5, 10, oh hell, even the last 2 or 3 years. Where was their empathy for black bodies that were lying on the streets in the aftermath of extrajudicial murders by the police? Right, they were slapping on Blue Lives Matter stickers and looking for any hint of criminality to justify the murder of black children. Remember when these poor Trump voters who justified a grown man driven by racist assumptions murdering a 15-year-old boy because he was suspended from school for smoking pot? I'm going to go ahead and call out the asylees and immigrant communities here too. Let's not pretend that there is not a virulent anti-blackness, anti-poorness, and anti-Muslim sentiments among immigrant communities. And there wasn't passionate immigrant supporters who thought Trump was going to go after the people who deserve to be put in their place. I don't know the asylees personally, but I'm willing to venture that they thought because the husband was educated at New York University, a dentist, and Christian, somehow they were different. They were deserving immigrants and thought these hateful white people would surely understand they were closer to being white than those undeserving black and brown people. At the heart of this empathy narrative and the pleas from the media and Trump voters who might be on the losing side is the notion that they deserve empathy. They deserve to be the exception to the cruel and inhumane policies they voted for. Whether it's Kathy from Florida, who says she'd rather be working than getting a government subsidy for her health insurance, or the asylees who say that security is important, but they're not a threat, they're all making individual cases for why the government should give them a break. However, even in the midst of describing their suffering, they make a distinction implicitly that they are hardworking and deserving. The implication, of course, is that those other people, presumably black and brown people, are not deserving. And by that reasoning, if we're going to be a country scarce on empathy and only reserve it for people who truly deserve it, I'd rather save time to prevent tragedies like Kalief Browder, a 16-year-old young black man who was falsely accused of stealing a backpack. That's right, a backpack, and languished in the harsh conditions of Rikers Island for 3 years before having his case dismissed. The trauma of his imprisonment eventually led him to commit suicide at the age of 22. If you've never heard of Kalief Brown, it's a demonstration of how our society stratifies who gets empathy. A poor black boy from Brooklyn who gets caught up in the utterly broken justice system is not someone that garners much empathy from society, much less these Trump voters asking for empathy now. They will say he did something, even if it's an unknown something, and deserved what he got. If you want to know more about this gut-wrenching story, check out the recent documentary, The Kalief Brown Story. But as Kalief and his mother point out in the documentary, they deserve justice and empathy our society never deemed they deserved. I'd rather save my empathy for Brisha Meadows, a young 14-year-old girl who is sitting in jail for shooting her abusive father. Of course, she didn't get to go home while awaiting trial like George Zimmerman did. And of course, we won't discuss the empathy she deserves for a system that doesn't treat domestic violence as seriously as it should. I hold my empathy for the transgender kids that are not going to have the dignity and safety to use the bathrooms of their choice while in school. Kids who are already so marginalized, particularly in places that are not hospitable to anyone other than white heterosexual people, are going to feel the harsh consequences of that. My empathy is with Avalika Gonzalez and his 4 daughters. ICE agents arrested the father, who has been in this country for more than 20 years, on his way to dropping off his children at school. They were 1 block away from school when he was arrested with the children in the car. If we're only holding empathy for the deserving among us, my empathy is with people like these, the true victims of the selfish decision and racism of people like the ones that supported Trump.